Hi, everybody. This is Professor H. Welcome back to another Psych 9 Developmental Psychology video. In this video, we're going to look at Chapter 7, Part 3, Middle Childhood, Emotional and Social Development. We're going to take a look at emotional development, self-development, and the social and cultural contexts of middle childhood. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. In middle childhood, children seem to have a much better grip on their emotions. They tend to have fewer emotional outbursts. They have a higher level of emotional well-being when compared to younger or older children. They have really good emotional self-regulation. This is something that has been growing since toddlerhood, and by middle childhood, they have a pretty good emotional self-regulation. They also have an increased understanding of other people's emotions, and they have an understanding of ambivalence. In other words, they can understand that a person can have more than one emotion being experienced at once. For example, and you may get a birthday gift that you really are not thrilled with, and the child may just kind of give that smile, act happy, and when inside, they're just very disappointed in that gift. One of the ways that they came to the conclusions that we just talked about in our previous slide is through a method called the experience sampling method, the ESM. And the way that this data collection tool works is the child would wear a wristwatch and it would beep at certain times during the day. At whatever time the wristwatch beeps, at that time they record their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. There would be a Likert scale that they could use, saying that they were either happy to unhappy. For example, on a scale from 1 to 5, how happy are you, with 5 being the most happy? Cheerful to irritable, friendly to angry, hurried, tired, and competitive. These are all things that they were questioned on using a Likert scale when the watch beeped. So it happened several times through the day. The conclusion was that middle childhood children are very happy 28% of the time, which is a far higher percentage than with adults and adolescents. In addition, children have a pretty good developed sense of self-concept by the time they are in middle school. They're starting to figure out who they are or who they feel like they are. How we view and evaluate ourselves is our self-concept. In middle childhood, this changes from an internal view to an external view. For example, if you ask a younger child how to describe themselves, they will say something like, I have red shoes, I have brown hair, I have a dog named Warrior. They would use things like that to describe themselves, which are external characteristics. In middle childhood, they've learned how to change that to an internal concept. So they would describe themselves as like, I am a good friend, I am happy, I am someone who enjoys helping other people. So it turns more to those internal characteristics in order to describe themselves, which is a reflection of their self-concept. Children begin to describe themselves more in psychological and personality trait related terms, as I mentioned before. I am friendly, I am a helper, I am kind. So those are the types of things that they might say. They also become a little more accurate in their social comparisons. Younger children seem to have kind of inflated self-esteem or their idea about themselves. You talk to a kindergarten, they are the best at everything they do. They are the very, very best. Well, by the time they reach middle childhood, they figure out that, oh, you know what? There are some kids, I'm good at this, but there are some kids that are better. I'm really bad at math, but I'm good at writing. I'm really good at art, but I'm bad at basketball. And they start making some social comparisons, and they become more accurate with those social comparisons in middle childhood. Self-esteem is a person's overall sense of worth and well-being. And as I mentioned previously, younger children have kind of an inflated sense of self-esteem. Self-esteem is not considered the same way in different cultures. In the United States, which is a Western country, self-esteem is valued. Having somebody that has a high sense of self-esteem is a desired trait, as long as they're not like over the top. In Japan, however, self-criticism is valued and self-esteem is considered a character flaw. This is partially due to the different natures of the cultures. The Western societies are individualistic cultures. Individualistic cultures are more interested in the individual well-being, whereas Japan is a collectivist culture, which part of their focus is on the well-being of the community, the well-being of the society. So criticizing yourself in the view of, oh, you know, how can I do better for my society or my group, is more important than self-esteem, which makes you want to kind of crawl to the top of the pile, which is not beneficial in a collectivist culture. In addition, self-esteem becomes more differentiated in middle childhood. I kind of alluded to that already. Self-esteem would be like, I am good at art, but I am not very good at basketball, that type of thing. They also develop more self-concepts, and that is very similar. Those self-concepts of, you know, I am a really good at helping other people, but sometimes I want to be by myself and I want to be left alone. So you can have different types of self-concept that you develop. The concept of the self varies among cultures. And as mentioned, there are some differences between individualistic and collectivist cultures. The independent self is something that is very valued and encouraged in individualistic cultures. It encourages reflection of the self, personal interests first. So, you know, it's kind of that pursuit of individual happiness versus what you would be interested in a collectivist culture, which is the interest of the group or family, which would come first. So that is interdependent self would be most important. Most cultures are not purely one or the other. There are circumstances where the independent self is important in some circumstances and interdependent is important in other circumstances. Parenting is also based on cultural influences, and it impacts self-esteem as well. For example, in Western cultures, children receive a lot of praise, and that frequent praise is thought to be beneficial to some degree, beneficial in Western culture, whereas criticism has a tendency to produce lower self-esteem. So that support and encouragement, higher self-esteem, criticism, lower self-esteem. Now that is in a Western culture. However, in an Eastern culture, like China, Japan, places like that, children have grown up to expect criticism, and receiving criticism also often is associated with higher self-esteem, where they have learned to critically evaluate themselves, and it does not damage their self-esteem within that particular culture, as a general rule. Gender roles. Excuse me. Gender roles are more sharply divided in middle childhood. We see in earlier periods of childhood that children are starting to gravitate towards girls playing together, boys playing together. And in middle school, these divisions are even more sharply divided. In traditional cultures, gender roles are defined by differences in daily activities of men and women. And within those cultures, you know, a man may be expected to go do hunting, some other activities like that, and where the female maybe gender role would be to cook and care for the children. So there are different societies have different expectations of gender roles. There are genders specific personality traits are also socialized. So how are you supposed to be? What are your personality supposed to be like if you're a girl? What is your personality supposed to be like if you're a male? Across many cultures, men are supposed to be independent and tough according to the specific traits of those gender roles. Women are often expected to be nurturing and compliant, and that is across many cultures. Modern cultures, the gender roles are less rigid and more flexible during middle childhood. So basically, places like the United States have more fluid and more flexible gender roles. This is not across everyone, but there is more flexibility in this than in your traditional cultures. Attitudes and behaviors have become more stereotyped in middle childhood. So by the time somebody's in middle childhood, they pretty much have it figured out what their gender, what they're supposed to be behaving like for their gender that they are supposed to be, that society says they should be. Personality traits are gender specific, as in developed countries, and occupations often become associated with gender. And we have seen this across cultures as well. For example, for years in the United States, a secretary was a female, or, you know, in the more recent days, you know, people would think of a secretary as being a female. Well, however, or a seamstress, or somebody who, a tailor, I guess they call it a tailor, somebody who does sewing. So the people who did sewing back in like the 1900s or the late 1800s, I guess, those people doing that type of sewing were men. Men were the ones who did the sewing and had the sewing machines and did that type of work. Later on, it became a more feminine associated occupation. So sometimes occupations have changed their gender association also. All right, so moving away from that, there's a lot more to be said about that, but we're not going to go there right now. Let's talk about family. Parenting moves from direct control toward co-regulation. What this means is that when a child is younger, a parent directs pretty much all of their activities and controls and decides what they're doing pretty much all the time. By the time a child is in middle childhood, this type of parenting is changed a little bit to what you would call co-regulation. In other words, there's some dialogue back and forth regarding the direct control of the child. The child is starting to become more responsible for themselves. They're given more freedom and more responsibility. In addition, sibling rivalry also peaks in middle childhood. So you would see a lot more sibling spats during this period of time. Diverse family forms. In the US, 63% of children live with two biological or adoptive parents. And I don't know what year this is. I'm sorry, I didn't put the year of this study up here. 21% live with a single mom, which increases the likelihood of poverty, as we have mentioned earlier. And the remainder in other family forms, often with the grandparents. So 63% with two parents, 21% with a single mom, and the remainder with other family forms, which would be a single dad, grandparents, aunt and uncle, something like that. In addition, there are a large number of gay and lesbian couples who also live with children. And just, I don't have the research to put here with this, and I'll try to add that at a later time. There is no evidence that supports the idea that a child who is raised in a gay or lesbian home is more likely to be gay or lesbian than a child who is not raised in a gay or lesbian home, just so that you can have that information. And I will try to find a reference for you for that information. Your book probably does talk about this. Children's response to divorce. Wow. Okay. Divorce is a very traumatic experience for anybody in the family. There are different types of behaviors that we see with children that they exhibit during a divorce or after divorce. One type of behavior is called externalizing behaviors, and that is impulsive and conflicts with family. So those are those outward expressions of being very unhappy or upset by the situation. It's being expressed outwardly. Internalizing problems are depression, anxiety, phobia, sleep disturbances. These things are things that are more internalized. The low point occurs about 1 year post-divorce, and basically the way to make this a little easier on the kids is to minimize the amount of parental conflict. Don't put those kids in the middle, and don't be having those kids take sides. Putting that child first by your behavior is the best thing you can do about minimizing these responses that children have to divorce. In addition, there's other research that I believe is in your book that talks about mothers having actually more difficulty with sons. That particular relationship becomes a little bit more bumpy and volatile after a divorce when the son is living with the mom. Okay. Family processes affected by divorce. Mother's parenting becomes more punitive, oftentimes due to financial reasons, due to whatever. Moms become less patient. So their parenting oftentimes becomes more punitive, meaning that there's more punishments involved. Mother and son, oh, here it is. Mother and son relationships turn into a coercive cycle. So they are often butting heads with one another, and fathers who remain involved have children with fewer post-divorce problems. So when the dad is like, peace out, I'm gone, and they are not actively involved with those children for whatever reason, the children do not have as good of an outcome. Divorce mediation can minimize damage to children. In other words, rather than just really duking it out, if parents can agree to mediate, a little give and take, and try to put those children first, it can minimize the response that those children have to divorce. It can minimize the negative consequences. Easier said than done, I'm sure, but it can. Children's responses to remarriage can also be very complicated. Most step families involve the entrance of a stepfather, because in most cases, these children are living with the mom and the dad has exited the home. That doesn't always happen. There's lots of dads who have the kids, but I'm just saying in general, it's oftentimes the mom. They are more likely. Now, once a stepfather enters the home, the mother's life seems to improve significantly, but the children's life seems to become worse. Children, the causes for this negative outcome include disruption of family systems. So in other words, it's not just you and mom figuring out anymore. It's you, stepdad, and mom. And then if dad's in the picture too, it can all be very complicated. The perception of stepfather interfering, or stepmother if it's the other way. And children may resent stepfathers. They can also resent stepmothers, but it seems like stepfathers have more resentment according to some of the documentation. And you can look in your textbook for the references on these research. I did not have time to add all that in these PowerPoints. Okay, making friends in middle high school. They prefer to be around others like themselves. I mean, as human beings, we tend to enjoy being around like-minded people. That's no different in middle childhood. If you're hanging out with the kids that like to play basketball or sports, you're hanging out with them. If you like to do some other club activities, you'll hang out with those people that enjoy those things. If you like to do art, you'll find other kids to hang out with that do art. And friendship can change from early childhood to middle childhood, because as children develop their interests and develop their social skills, they also start to realize who is it that they can trust and who they don't trust. So the friend situation becomes a little more complicated at this age, and trust becomes important, not just sharing an activity that you both enjoy. Oh, goodness. Okay, popularity and unpopularity. So in middle childhood, this is when, I mean, all along in school, this popularity, unpopularity thing is kind of been there, but in middle childhood is where it kind of comes to a head. The social status becomes very important, and you have basically 4 categories of kids. I mean, 4 major categories of kids, and then another category of kids that don't fit into these 4 categories. So the first one is popular, which are most often liked kids. The second type of kid is rejected, who are disliked by many other children. And then we can probably think about when we were in school, and there's always that kid that nobody wants to hang out with, nobody wants to play with, he's the weird kid, you know, that type of thing. And you know, that kid has a whole nother battle that they have to fight. Neglected, which are neither liked nor disliked. So there's no active, you know, stuff going on there, but they're just kind of there. Controversial. So controversial kids are the ones that are liked by some and disliked by others. They can often be popular, and they can be aggressive. So these controversial kids kind of have a mixed status within the social world of the middle schooler, middle childhood school children. Okay, playing with friends. Simple social play remains popular. So just kind of doing stuff you enjoy doing together, but play becomes more complex and rule-based. During this particular period of time, a lot of friends start having arguments over they're playing a particular game. There's certain rules that they have in place for this game, and somebody breaks the rules or not following the rules, or somebody tries to make a new rule. Oh, no, now this is a rule. When did that become a rule? And that can be a source of conflict sometimes between friends. And once again, trust becomes more important to friendship in middle childhood. Bullies and victims. There are 3 components of bullying: aggression, repetition, and power imbalance. So these are the 3 main components of bullying. There are 2 general types of bullies. The first one is rejected children who are bully victims. Okay, so a lot of times the rejected kids are victims of bullying, and then they also become a type of bully. Controversial children also oftentimes become bullies. And interestingly, even popular kids can be bullies as well. Victims most often are rejected children with low self-esteem and low social skills. And those are the kids that are most often the victims of bullies, because they don't have a big social support. Friends are an important thing for kids. It insulates them from bullying and it protects them. So if you have a kid that doesn't have any friends, then they are easy victims for bullies because nobody's going to come to their aid. All right. According to our model put forth by Erik Erikson, his 8 stages of psychosocial development, our child is now in this industry versus inferiority category, this 5 to 13 years old. According to this theory, the child will go one of 2 ways. Either they learn to work successfully within their cultural context, which is, you know, within their school environment, within their home environment, all of that. And then they become on the industry side of that. If adults are too critical and, you know, not nurturing, and, you know, they're getting kind of put down a lot, they can develop a sense of being incapable and being on the inferiority side of that, that equation there. Okay, in developed countries, the focus on play type work or work type play, children do things that are kind of work-ish to help train them to do things, to learn things. And most of that is in a play type of setting. In developing countries, work contributes to family income. So in our writing assignment for this week, we have some video, or at least one video to watch about children who are working in the cocoa industry. And it's important, these children are working, they contribute to family incomes. About 73 million children are employed worldwide, according to estimates. And once again, about that, children that are employed in middle childhood, they have good enough cognitive skills to where they can make the decisions needed to do work. And they have the physical ability, the dexterity, and their fine motor skills to be very valuable in like factories and such. Media use in middle childhood, about 1/4 of the media use involves media multitasking. So they're on the computer and they're on the phone at the same time. They're playing PlayStation and they're texting and doing lots of stuff at once. Research shows that television has both negative and positive effects. Effects of television impact by use or exposure. Research supports the link between television watching and aggressive behavior. Now, this is a correlative, there is a correlation between viewing like violent shows and stuff and aggressive behavior. It's not a causal relationship, but it's a correlational relationship. Okay, and television, the type of exposure that you have and what you're watching can desensitize you to some things or even make you more sensitive to other things. All right, that's it. Woohoo, we got through that. I will get some more videos out to you as soon as I can. Please remember to shoot me an email with your questions and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Have a great evening, or whatever time of day it is that you're watching this. It's evening for me. And I hope to speak to you soon at one of our office hours meetings, or if you want to schedule a personal Zoom video with me, we can do that too. So just give me a shout. Take care.